Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 20th edition of Crop Talk. And this week we seen some combines going in the field, and which was nice to see. Some crop is starting to come off, and but rain has kind of slowed everything down again. And I think we might see some rain over the next couple of days here too. So we might get a slow stop to harvest for a while, and then guys will be probably maybe hopefully back in the field by the weekend after the system goes through. But I guess with summer going on here, we've seen some dry conditions in a lot of areas, and with those dry conditions, we've seen some things happening to water supplies and especially for a lot of the livestock producers. And thought it'd be a good opportunity today to get Elizabeth Nuremberg to come on. She's a forage and livestock specialist from Manitoba Ag, and talk a little bit about some of the water quality that we've been seeing, some of the issues producers are facing, some of the things maybe they could do to improve that. And then from that, we'll probably go into a couple other things that Elizabeth has been working on over the last little while here. And then we'll get into crop update and the crop scouting panel. So I guess with that, I'll hand the screen over to Elizabeth, and we'll let her get into her presentation today.
Perfect. Thanks, Lionel. Thanks for the invite. There, you can probably hear me better. Thanks for the introduction and the invite to chat more about water quality and things that we are seeing or have been seeing over the summer months. Okay, so I'll just share my screen here and bear with me. Okay, how does that look?
Looks good, Elizabeth.
Okay, perfect. So lots of times, in livestock production, we talk a lot about feed. And in fact, water is, the single most important nutrient. It's most essential, to sustain life. It's not surprising when you look at it accounts for 50 to 80% of an animal's live weight. So when we talk about animal production and maximizing feed intake and performance, obviously we require access to palatable water. That is, we need both adequate quality as well as quantity. So we're going to kind of review some of those characteristics in the next few minutes here. When we talk about water intake, several factors come into play, the size and the type of your animal. So one of the more larger consumers of water would be, cow calf pair, and then your mature herd bulls. But they can be a cow calf pair, for example, can consume about 15 gallons per day. So when you think about that, that's a fair amount. Excuse me. The physiological state of the animal, what stage of production they're in, the activity level of the animal. Are they wandering around a pasture? Or are they just sitting in the feedlot? That kind of thing. Also, the diet that they're being provided. Is it mostly dry feed? Is it a wet forage, like a silage based in terms of a winter plan? Well, then there's some water in there. Is it fresh, lush grass out in the pasture? Those all are higher moisture feeds that where they have some moisture and water supplied as well. What are the weather conditions like? And so, as Lionel said, in the summertime, we're seeing more of an issue for several factors. But, obviously one of those is the increase in consumption with warmer temperatures and that kind of thing. So water quality comes into play. As they've done some research, and the better the water quality tends to mean the livestock will consume more water. Ease of access. Do they have to wade through a bunch of mud to get through the water, or is it being provided in a system similar to the one being pictured here? Water temperature is also important. And there's been some work shown on that. If we can provide a cooler temperatured water, they seems to increase water consumption. And taste and odor of the water also comes into play. So as what Lionel had mentioned, this past summer, conditions have changed since we first chatted about this, and we've been getting, our staff have been getting calls throughout the growing season and the warmer months here. But and what happens over the summer? So as the cattle are out on pasture, they're growing, they've got their calves, water demand increases on that watering hole or that spot. There's more demand. And so what happens over the summer is as they are consuming more, the amount of water is going can decrease from consumption as well as evaporation. And in many areas across Manitoba, there was limited rainfall, to recharge those duggets that required rainfall to replenish the resources on those types of systems. So we've got evaporation of the good water, perhaps, as a way of putting it, going. And so what we're left with is some of those salts and minerals. And so if the water wasn't great quality to begin with, as the summer goes on and these things come into play, the poor water is going to get worse. And then as we've got the summer heat, we can also have some bacteria growth, any contamination with like E. coli and those types of things and other coliforms. And I just wanted to give credit, as we probably all familiar with a couple of years ago, the situation that unfolded in Saskatchewan with the poor water quality. And this is some work that Colby had put together. And it looks at, so kind of at the beginning of the summer, he did some water quality testing, over a duration of the summer. And this is each line represents a different water source or different dugout. So at the beginning of the summer, the sulfate level was lower and was adequate or, deemed suitable or acceptable for livestock consumption. And as time went on, as the levels get higher, it wasn't suitable for livestock production. And I'll kind of cover some of that in the following slides. So one of the big factors that could reduce water quality, that was all the hype and what we hear a lot about, is blue-green algae. Um, so just kind of back up a little bit. So the algae are the small rootless plants that normally live in surface water. They grow very quickly in warm, stagnant water that's not moving. So, and it needs a source of nutrients. So that water is high in nutrients, which usually can come from runoff from agricultural land, can be one source. So cyanobacteria, or the blue-green algae, kind of is usually in that top 3 feet of water. And one way to kind of look at it, it's unlike your green algae, but that it's difficult to pick up. When you go and obviously wear a glove and just be careful when handling this stuff. But when you go to pick it up, the blue-green algae, it'll run through your fingers like slime, and the appearance of it can range. It can look like kind of like a paint spill, or it can also have this grass clipping effect. And so what happens is when there's a disturbance to the water body, and lots of times this can be wind, it causes the algae to die off, releasing that bacterial toxin that then floats. So that is what, and lots of times when it's a wind, it pushes it to one side of the water body where it's more concentrated. And this can pose serious risk to the animals directly accessing that water and drinking, along the shoreline. If you see this, just definitely be cautious. And if you happen to notice accumulation, say it's been a windy day, those toxins will remain in that water body for about 14 days after a bloom. Also wanted to note that Prairie Diagnostic Services, so the lab in Saskatoon at the Vet College, they can do a blue-green LJ test. It's about $150. And if you're concerned or interested in doing that, there's their contact information, or don't hesitate to reach out to us. But there are some specific sampling protocol and how you need to handle the sample to ensure accurate results. When we're looking at dugouts and, Lionel and I talked a bit about this, and thank him for the pictures on the left here. Um, so lots of times when we get calls from producers and you're kind of doing the drive by and like, oh my goodness, look at that water source. It's full of algae and what am I got to do? And can they still use it? And so the first thing is kind of, get out of the truck and take a closer look. We need to identify what we're dealing with so proper action can be taken. So what are we looking at here? Is this algae or this is duckweed? So lots of times duckweed can commonly be mistaken for the blue-green algae. But duckweed is more of an aquatic plant, so it's more complex than algae. It's got specialist tissues like roots, leaves, stems. It's not harmful to cattle, and it's actually considered beneficial for a dugout. So these tiny plants form a thin mat on the surface of the water, so that prevents light penetration, into that water column. And also it has roots that will draw nutrients out of the dugout, so it helps. So both of these two characteristics can help reduce algae and cyanobacteria growth. So if duckweed is present in your dugout, no action needs to be taken. So this is duckweed on the left, and on the next slide, I'll kind of do a close-up. And then on the right here, it's not the best picture, but I'm sure we've all seen it kind of accumulate on the shorelines. This is more green algae. Um, and so there again, it results from the right combination of nutrients, light, and water temperature. It can be common in, stock tanks and even watering bowls. And the green algae is not typically a problem for cattle, but it can just be a nuisance for water delivery systems, clogging intake lines. And so that's kind of why we recommend if you're providing off-site watering, to have the intakes located in the center of the dugout, 3 to 4 feet below the surface of the water, just to help with that. So here on the left is a really great picture of duckweed. So if you look closely, you can see the little roots. So once you grab a handful, and there again, I probably recommend, having some gloves on in case it happens to be the blue-green algae by chance. But you can see the kind of leaf-like structure, and it's like little sacs, little disc-like leaves that, kind of can be described as miniature lily pads. It's bright green in color. And then green algae, when you go to scoop it out over here, it's kind of like a mat of tangled wet hair. And it's a deeper green usually. Ooh, and duckweed. Hang on a sec. Was a little crazy with the mouse. Okay. Um, so kind of wants, more of the dugout maintenance and treatment. So some of what can be done is kind of before the problem happens. And so we'll kind of go over some maintenance as well as some treatment options. So it's important to control the nutrient loading. That's the main factor that comes into play with algae growth. And if you can divert runoff from cultivated and nutrient-rich fields, is there some holding pens or animal pens nearby per se? Only allow that first melt water into the dugout as much as possible. Um, Restricting and keeping the livestock out can help with water quality. Providing some troughs, or there's many different systems out there to get the water from a watering source into trough. But by removing cattle and the livestock from there, we're avoiding depositing nutrients directly into the watering source from the manure and the urine. Aeration can also help. This moves the water so it's not stagnant. It keeps it cooler and just promotes an aerobic environment to ensure the constant cycling of nutrients, preventing that buildup of nutrients, which can kind of fuel the algae growth. Increasing vegetation around your watering hole. Aim for some healthy riparian areas, so that will naturally filter out some of the runoff water, and it just provides a buffering zone around your watering source. This is very important, and a big one, get out there like we talked about, see what you're dealing with. And if it's something like duckweed, or if there is no algae, do not treat it. So there are some strains of the small green algae that have become resistant to some of the copper sulfate treatments. So just kind of be sure if that's the route you do choose. We have all kinds of resources and guidelines in terms of the products, but make sure you're using a registered product, follow the product label. Um, and this is another good example of too much of a good thing. Make sure you calculate correctly because we don't want to overtreat these sources because it could actually cause more of a follow-up algal bloom than you had to start with. Important as we talked about with the blue-green algae just dying off naturally. So the same thing comes into play here. Those toxins are going to be released for 14 days after. So if you are treating the algae with something like copper sulfate, or also known as bluestone, you need to remove the cattle and provide an alternate watering source for at least that 14 days. Altering dugout shape, make sure banking the slopes to that 2-to-1 ratio. We don't, it will reduce the amount of shallow water at the areas at the end of the dugouts and less area for aquatic weeds to grow. You might want to consider doing some mechanical control on some of the water weeds, like dragging or those kinds of things, or for example, trimming cattails so that they don't kind of fall back into the watering source. We're just trying to limit the nutrients being introduced back into the dugout. And reward or dicot is registered for water weeds and just follow label directions in terms of withdrawals and that kind of thing for using that water also. So algae is obviously important or part of the equation for water quality. So I'll just quickly go through some other common factors that can affect water quality and kind of take a different approach in doing that is that we did a water quality survey. So last fall, we looked at 39 pastures across the province and kind of a variety of different types of systems, 17 dugouts that had direct access, 4 were fenced off, and 18 wells. And we're in the process of doing it again this summer. So we're just kind of going through the results and getting them back. And so stay tuned and look out for our bulletins that are in cattle country. And it'll be interesting to see the difference from year to year. Obviously, it's different sites and um, just more of a general trend as opposed to concrete specific. It's not a scientific research study, but we did find some different interesting things. So kind of generally and broad speaking, overall the fence dugouts had the best water quality. The well had the lowest quality, and I'll kind of explain a little bit of that as we go on. Um, so what surprised us, so the water uh, from the dugouts allowing cattle access was of higher quality than the water sampled from the wells. So that's not to say that the cattle didn't weren't a detrimental effect. It was just the different types of water and the different types of systems and how they're being recharged and replenished. As we remember last year, we had a lot of fresh water, a lot of snow, more snow and rain, and so maybe the dugouts just had, more water, right, with above average levels of precipitation. The dugouts were in good condition last year going into the fall. Okay, and so total dissolved solids is kind of the number one or the first thing, the main indicator of water quality that we looked at. And if you remember from the case in Saskatchewan a couple of years ago, this was through the roof. I can't remember the details, but it was way beyond kind of the safe level. So this is measured in milligrams per liter, parts per million. And water is an excellent solvent and it picks up impurities easily, right? And so that's kind of why we see maybe some of the well water quality is different. Um, but it comprises of inorganic salts and small amounts of organic matter into the water. So all of our samples were below 3,000 milligrams. So kind of we were in that acceptable. We had one well that was kind of the borderline, the 3,000. So there's the results there, and just in terms of what we can see in terms of production issues and concerns. Nitrates we also looked at is important for water quality. So nitrates themselves aren't toxic. The bacteria in the rumen convert it to nitrite. The nitrate diffuses into the bloodstream and reduces the oxygen carrying capacity of our blood cells. So what happens is we have, the shortness of breath and suffocation. So you probably heard of nitrates being more referred to or more spoken about in terms of feeds, right? When we have a plant stress, like a drought, a frost, or a hail. We talk about nitrate testing in that capacity. And so, very rarely do we see it nitrate toxicity exclusively from water. It can be more feed, but it's worthwhile to look at, when you combine feed and water, that we have to look at those values. So we no issues were seen with the samples that we had taken last fall. Sulfates is another big indicator of water quality. Sulfates are common in groundwater across the prairies and have also been found in spring-fed dugouts and surface sources that drain from saline soils. So safe levels of sulfates vary depending on the type of livestock and the stage of production. Younger ruminant animals tend to be more sensitive to sulfate than mature animals. And feeder animals in high grain diets are more susceptible than animals consuming a high forage diet. So we also need to kind of look at sulfates in the water as well as sulfates in the feed too. So some feeds that are higher in sulfates could be DDG or canola forage, which typically isn't being offered on pasture, but I guess you never know if producers are extending feed, or some of these wells were also used in terms of winter feeding as well as pasture sites too. So just keep in mind. So of our samples, um, we can see that, we had a well at 350, but all the samples are relatively low, and we look at kind of our maximum concentrations of, anywhere from 600 to 2,500. Um, and BCRC and, Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture is a really good resource. And they have this interpretation of kind of looking at the breakdown of sulfate levels and some of the things that it can kind of hamper an animal production. And kind of one of the bigger things or the more talked about is the sulfates can interfere with some trace mineral availability like copper. So it's one of the things that we look more closely at, especially if herds have been reporting a higher number of open cattle. Kind of one of the first things that we will quiz them further is on water sources and look at sulfates. So kind of just to sum up, I mean, this is not rocket science, and it's not surprising, but water is very important, and um, lots of times the quality and the factors we discussed aren't necessarily fatal, but it can cause, affect growth, lactation, and reproduction, and so maybe it's more some of those subtle differences that we don't necessarily can see as quickly. And over the years, many have done research, and it has showed with high excuse me, high quality water, the animals will drink more, therefore eat more. They'll gain more weight quicker, and we will just overall general better animal health and a decrease in disease and other health problems. And so, what do we do and how do we manage those kinds of things? So, analyzing your water is important. It can change from year to year and even from the course over a season. And we've discussed that with the conditions this summer, as well as some of the work that SaskAg had done over the year and just seeing how the sulfur levels had changed. So conduct those water tests regularly. Do not rely on past analysis. And retest immediately if you see changes in, the taste, the smell, the clarity of the water. Look at animal performance, have their eating habits or drinking habits changed? And in years like this, probably maybe more so important a couple of weeks ago, but the dry conditions require increased vigilance. Um, and so when collecting the water, use a clean container. Lots of labs will ship out water samples. Talk to your watershed districts. They often have resources or watering programs. And just get a representative sample of what the cattle are drinking. So try to reach in a couple feet or use some type of stick with an extendable handle that just allows you to get a better sample. And I just wanted to mention, so, sometimes there's things that we can do to make some changes to the watering systems, depending on what we're dealing with. Some of it goes back to proactive measures and maintenance, and those kind of things. And some systems can be put in place for other things like sulfates or reverse osmosis systems, but they can be quite costly and probably aren't used a lot in pasture situations. I also wanted to take this opportunity. Many of you are probably familiar with, but we do have a Manitoba hay listing service. So you would just call our 1844 number to get a listing added. But feel free to scan the QR code to access the system, or you can also visit the website here just to view what's available. Um, in light of some possible feed shortages or even those who've got lots of feed, it's always good to do a feed test, and we can definitely work with you on interpreting your feed tests as well as working through some rations. Cow Bites is also available. The ration balancing program is also available for purchase. I believe it's around $50 or $60, and we'd be glad to work with producers learning the program. We can email ration files back and forth, that kind of thing. So here's a location of where there are feed probes available. So don't hesitate to reach out to those offices or call the 1844 number and we'll be glad to direct you in the right direction. Also wanted to mention, so those who are facing feed shortages and are forced to sell off part of their breeding herd due to dry conditions, there is a livestock tax deferral program, and here's the map here. So it's kind of more the central Interlake area. Here's the list of RMs. But yeah, I would, we could definitely look up the details for you or visit their website. And there's different parameters and how much, I believe it's a minimum of 15% of the breeding herd that you'd have to sell to be able to defer your tax to the following year, just to help with some of that planning. Lionel or Lori, are there any questions in terms of some of these programs or anything on water quality that folks want to discuss or take a look at further?
Sure, Elizabeth. A couple of questions. One of the questions is, okay, you mentioned about testing the water and you
Yeah.
say to do it frequently. How often should somebody test their water?
Yeah, that's a good question. And based on what I was kind of reading and gathering, it should be done annually. Um, you know, is it being done annually? I don't think many folks do. But it's about, I should mention too, it's probably about $200, I believe, depending on the lab and programs available to you. And kind of as I mentioned, if you're seeing changes throughout the season or you notice that it is drier, and then you can definitely test it, more regular if you see some of those changes in odor or um, animals are backing off or production concerns. But yeah, and even even in winter feeding too. I know we're talking more about pasture, but for sure there I'd like to see it at least annually. And it gets challenging on pastures, as you know, Lionel, because there's probably more than one watering source too, right? So yeah, start with something, right? You bet.
Exactly. Kind of get a starting point and go from there.
Yeah,
Another question that came through
yeah,
is grabbing a sample from a well.
yes.
Any differences in just grab the sample, or should I run the water, or what? Or
Yeah, there would be, I think, I think the lab on their sheets there are some procedure, but I know from experience if you can grab it directly, um, as direct as from the well as possible. Does that make sense? Because there is contamination in the pipes, right? And in the trough and those kinds of things. Just as I mentioned, how water is a solvent and it just, with the positive and the negative, it picks up so many different salts, right? So if there's an outside tap or if there's an outside hydrant, or yes, anything like that. If you have to use a tap, sometimes there's screens underneath that you pop that off just so that's not contaminating it. And yeah, it's also a good idea just to let it run for a little bit, especially if you're using something like a garden hose or something where it's pooling, but it as close to the source as possible that you can if there's an outdoor hydrant or that kind of thing would give you better results.
Okay, and this one not maybe quite to deal with water, but
Okay.
uh, I put up green feed
Yep.
because of the dry conditions,
Mm,
and now after the rain, I'm seeing regrowth. What are
hmm.
your recommendations for pasturing?
Right. Do we know what crop it is, or do you think it's more of a nitrate
It's
question,
yeah,
probably?
I think it's
Okay.
probably a nitrate question.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a whole nother topic. But with nitrates, so some years we have seen nitrates with dry conditions. Now, I'm assuming that it's regrowing, so we've probably had sufficient moisture, so it's probably not stressed anymore. So I think the risk of nitrates would be low. If we would have had a light frost, then it might be a different story. Um, and with nitrates, over a period of 10 to 14 days, cattle can, their bugs in the rumen and their microbes, they can adapt and change. So there is an adaptation period of about 10 to 14 days where over that they can tolerate higher levels. If we're concerned and we think it's nitrates, we always say dilute, introduce slowly, make sure they're full before you turn them out or provide that feed. And once they're on it, keep them on it. Don't feed one day and then pull it off the next because it just resets that adaptation process and that balance. But I don't think there would be, without knowing the specifics in the case history, if there hasn't been, if it's been minimally stressed, I don't anticipate nitrates. Or severe or high nitrates. Other factors, was it heavily fertilized? Was a lot of manure applied? Those kind of things come into question too. And sometimes where we've seen higher levels was I fertilized this field for canola, for example, and so I pumped the N and then I went to a green feed or those kinds of things. So hopefully that answers that question. I can definitely reach out to the individual later too if they wanted a more in-depth question, more
Yeah,
answer.
I think I know where the question's coming from, and I
Okay.
think what it was alfalfa
Oh, okay.
last year, worked
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
sowed and fertilized for oats,
Okay.
and then the oats didn't grow because of the dry conditions, so they green
I
fed it
see.
where it was there, and
Right.
now they're looking at grazing it. So
Right. Right. So there could be more if there's residual nitrogen, right? If that oats crop
yeah,
didn't use it up. Um, but the plant isn't stressed. And the other thing is with grazing fresh, lush material, I understand it kind of passes through the animal quicker. So higher nitrates aren't as detrimental, or they can tolerate higher levels because of that higher rate of passage. I mean, another option is, you can submit a sample to the lab. It'll probably take about a week and you'll have a value that you can work with. They can tolerate the 0.5%. Um, but some folks have used time as a limiting factor, which can be hard and a challenge. They'll turn them out for a few hours and then bring them back in and feed them. So some have done that, but that's more, yeah, on extended grazing or crop for say that way, but that is an option too.
one of I guess experiences that I've seen is
Yeah.
sometimes cattle will regulate themselves almost. So
Okay.
there's a lot of fields will have sloughs or grass areas.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes they'll be on the high feed, and then sometimes they'll be back to
Right.
regular areas as well. So
Yeah, so that's all important part of the equation too, right? Are there those areas to graze, some bush lines or trees or that kind of thing, or throw some dry feed out there too? Yeah, you bet. Good questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions I have right now, but I think you're going to hang on for a bit
Yeah,
and
for sure.
okay, great. So in case something else comes in,
Yeah,
we'll,
you bet. Thanks.
great. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was a good presentation. Kind of get us up to date on managing our water.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we're going to go into a little bit of a uh, crop update here, and we're going to look at where we sit as a province and where we're seeing some harvest happening. And so I guess to get in and to start off, we'll look at the winter cereals, and think that's the one that we've seen the majority of the harvest happening. And when you look at the central and eastern and interlake areas, a lot of the winter cereals have been complete already. Early yields look like they're anywhere from 40 to 60 bushels for winter wheat, and excuse me, and in some areas as high as 60 to 90 that we were receiving a little bit more rainfall. Fall rye range from 60 to 90 bushels, and some really good yields of up to 135 in some areas. And I think those areas are ones that we probably seen maybe the right amount of rain, and the managing of a fall rye as not a second crop anymore, as a crop that you want to get max yields. So I think that's probably what we're seeing there. So um, some of the winter wheat fields I've been in are really close to harvest or have been harvested already. And there's just a sample of one of the heads I shelled out. And I see Anne, you're on. And one of the things I noticed in the fields, a couple of fields I've been in, is the pie ball in the kernels. What does that usually show or let us know, Anne?
And you can unmute yourself. She might have stepped away, Lionel.
Okay, no problem. Anyways, that's usually what I know when I used to talk to John Hurd, he would be mentioning that would be that you needed to give a little bit more nitrogen. So you probably didn't max out your yield there. And that's just kind of a heads up for next time, that if you've seen that in your winter wheat, you probably could have added a little bit more nitrogen. Lori, I'll get you to, if there's questions that come in, if you could just interrupt and let me know. Okay, spring wheat harvest, I would say, has just nicely begun throughout the province. And right now, early yield estimates range from anywhere from 45 to 75 bushels an acre. So pretty big range. But we also had areas where we were reporting, you know, excellent crop conditions to probably the majority of good and some fair, but we could be seeing a range of those different fields coming off. So that's probably where we're seeing such a fluctuation in yields. When you look at the chart below, this is the chart that we're going to be updating weekly now, and so you'll see where in each of the regions as to where harvest is kind of looking like. And right now we're seeing um, the province on the far right hand side. So when you look at winter wheat, the majority of the winter wheat still to be harvested is in the southwest and northwest area. And I always look at that and I say, well, that's probably because a lot of those fields maybe got sown a little later last fall and just didn't get that early spring jump. And as compared to the eastern side of the province, where a lot of the winter wheat gets planted a little bit earlier. So when you look at winter wheat and fall rye, we're about 52% complete across the province. Spring wheat, we're pretty much pretty consistent right across the board. We're anywhere from, basically just getting started in most regions, and about 6% complete. Barley, just the odd area in the southwest and northwest, but most of it again in the central to the interlake area, and about 8%. Field peas, this is the one that's going to jump quickly here. There was a lot of peas that have been sprayed for a while, and we're seeing a lot of guys that probably would have been combining this past weekend, or maybe even yesterday or today. And but rainfall has kind of slowed things down there. So as a province, we're about 20% complete, and it's uh, it's that's kind of where we sit there now. And then when you look at the province for completion of all harvest, we're at about 4%. And I just noticed I missed canola there, and some in the central area is about 2%. And I think last week the central area was reporting that some canola had been swathed, so we might be seeing some of those areas coming off. So that's where we sit harvest wise right now for the province. And so now just to go into a bit of the different crops here. Most field peas are in the R6 to R7 stage, and desiccation in most cases, in most areas, has been complete or is being done. And Reglone I've seen has been working fairly fast. A lot of those fields that have been sprayed have browned off within 2 to 3 days. Early seeded fields have been harvested. Early reports, average around 60 bushels. Wet conditions over the last few days have slowed down the harvest. Otherwise, I think that 20% would have been a lot higher. But that's where we sit on peas right now. Uh, Soybeans, R5 to R6 stage, and I think the rainfall we got and have been getting are kind of one of those $1 million rains for the soybean crop. It's made a huge difference. We've seen extra growth. We've seen pod development right to the very tops of the plant, even above canopy. I've seen fields where the pods are sticking up above the canopy, so they've definitely potted right to the top. So that's all going to bode well for the soybeans. I think the potential there is good now. Some guys have started to question me as to how long are they going to grow now that they've got the moisture, because they're concerned at the other end now as to how many days we have before they can make her in. But right now, I think we need to let them grow and develop and fill the pods as we get into the R6 stage. That'll be when we see full seeds in the pods. Seeing some of that in the lower pods now, but not in the uppermost pods. So that's why we're kind of in that R5 to R6 stage. Canola, as I mentioned, there's been some swathing happening. There's been some harvest happening, mainly again in the central region. Preliminary yields right now are looking anywhere from that 45 to 55 bushels an acre, which is, I think is good right now, because I think a lot of producers were maybe thinking we might not be getting into that range due to the heat and just some of the conditions the canola crop had to go through. Now this is based on a real small sample size, so we're yet to see where we're going to land up. But right now, the rain again is definitely helping the pods fill. We're seeing some huge pods in some fields, and that's a good sign. We're seeing seed color change happening in a lot of fields. A lot of guys are starting to monitor fields, and I think we might be, in a week's time, we'll probably see some spraying of some of the canola crops starting to happen, at least in the western side of the province, and probably before that in the eastern side, as they seem to be a little bit ahead of the game. So we'll get into the crop scouting panel. And one of the questions that I've been getting, and Sonia wasn't able to be on today, so I asked her this question yesterday, and I've had a couple producers starting to wonder about verticillium stripe and how they can check for it in the field. And it's it's something that's usually fairly easy to see, but it's usually happens a little later on in the season for noticing the symptoms. So I think right now, if you were to go into the field, it'd be kind of difficult to find unless you were able to, grab some plants, start cutting some plants in half and looking at the stems. But I'll show you some slides that she sent me regarding that. And A lot of times with verticillium stripe, what you'll see is a striping on one side of the plant, so almost like a one side of the plant looks more affected than the other side of the plant or the other side of the stem. So that's something to look for. Um, when you look at the cross section of your canola plant and you see verticillium stripe, you'll see the blackening of the whole stem as compared to something like blackleg, where you'll get just the partial part of the stem. Usually, with you get the lesion on one side of the stem, and then that's how it affects the plant. And the one on the far right is a clean sample. So that's kind of what to look for right now if you want to get out there and start checking. Truthfully, I haven't seen a whole bunch of it as of yet. Actually, disease disease right now is not very heavy out there in a lot of the crops. I know a lot of the cereal crops are looking good. Anne mentioned that last week about the fusarium, that it was low. I'm not seeing a lot of levels in canola right now. I guess one of the things that concern me, and some people are talking about now that we've been getting a fair bit of rain and high humidity and foggy mornings, if there was disease in some of the crops, is it going to spread fast? And that's a possibility. I think that's something we're going to need to watch for, especially in canola. And I think I talked to Amir last week, and he told me that he was seeing some sclerotinia in soybeans. So again, another thing to watch for as we're going out into the fields and checking. So when you look at blackleg, verticillium stripe, and gray stem, Sonia sent me this one as well. So when you look at stem symptoms, so you see that pycnidia and stem lesions are common in blackleg. In verticillium stripe, you get early striping on the stem, and then later on you'll get the shredding, and that'll happen later on in the season. That's why I said it's easier to see it later on in the season than it is to maybe see it right now. And with gray stem, you see a purple to gray speckled stem. Pod wise, you're really not going to see a big difference between blackleg and verticillium. The cross section we talked about, the black kind of on the black leg, and more maybe not the whole width of the stem, and then the grayish on the verticillium. Scouting tips, and here's kind of the take home message. Prior to harvest with blackleg, and we've all seen blackleg, and we've been seeing blackleg and sclerotinia in field when it gets close to harvest time. That's usually when we see the majority of the symptoms. But when you're talking about verticillium stripe, it's usually late in the season, and a lot of times it's post harvest, or when you're harvesting it is when you really can see it. And for gray stem, prior to harvest. Yield loss, a lot of information on that one regarding verticillium. We've been seeing it probably over the last 5 or so years now, and truthfully not seeing huge losses in yield compared to fields that don't have it. We all know what blackleg and can do to a field, so we've definitely seen in areas where you have severe blackleg, your losses can be higher. So right now, I guess with verticillium and gray stripe, not much we can do about it, and basically our yield losses are limited. Okay, so that handled the verticillium stripe, and I'm glad we still have Elizabeth on, because I starting to see a lot of producers eyeing up their second cut of alfalfa, and maybe some looking at their third cut. And I thought it was important that we maybe talk a little bit about when we should look at maybe not taking that cut and making sure we have a good crop for next year.
Yes, thanks, Lionel. I've been getting a few calls as well. And so thanks for pulling up this map. So this is what we call as the beginning of the critical fall harvest period for alfalfa. So the recommendation is, depending where you're in the map, that you should be harvesting that fall cut of alfalfa before these dates in order to give your crop the best chance to survive the winter. And the reason why and how this works, is we don't want the depletion of those root reserves. So root reserves are fully replenished at the point where the plants are in the full bloom stage. So when we take that cut of alfalfa, those root reserves are then used to initiate the new growth. And so they're at their lowest at 6 to 8 inches. So um, if we cut our alfalfa at the wrong time, so we go in, we cut it after these dates, which depending on the area, we're kind of there. And then that alfalfa starts to regrow. And if we get an earlier frost before those root reserves are replenished at the full bloom stage, you have more chance of winter kill. So these dates are based on, the first fall frost dates and trying to, forecasting to have 6 weeks of time to replenish those root reserves. Um, Now it all depends. If we had that magic crystal ball, are we going to have a long open fall? We're close enough to these dates. If I cut it today, yeah, you might be okay. There are no guarantees. So it's kind of, if you can do it, you know, respect these days and keep that in mind, and how the root reserves work and how you provide that best chance of winter survival. The other thing is, we get closer to the end of the growing season or those fall frosts. Alfalfa, I believe, a killing frost island, I think, is at -5. So it's quite a bit colder, right? And so, if you have a forecasted frost coming and you're confident that will happen, cutting that alfalfa around that time where it's not going to regrow and use up those root reserves can also work in your favor too. And it is a challenge to put up, later cuts of alfalfa, as we've seen with, sometimes we need to take advantage of good weather and good drying conditions and avoid the rains. As we get later on to the fall too, the days are shorter, there's less sunlight, and so things get harder and harder to dry down as well. So yeah, those are just kind of some things to keep in mind to ensure the best chance of winter survival on your alfalfa. There are other factors that come into play too. If older stands are more at risk for winter kill, some varieties are hardier. Um, if you've been pretty faithful with your fertility, potassium is important for assisting with winter kill survival. And on the other hand, if it's a stand that you're going to rip up anyway, then chop her down and have at it. So those are all kind of factors that come into play. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Lionel.
Okay, so you mentioned a good point there about cutting. So is it before the frost or after the frost?
Right. So a couple of factors that come into play. So people think more about, nitrates. So very seldom do we worry about nitrate. Sufficient or high accumulations of nitrates in alfalfa or in perennials. So that's one factor. And then the other one is just in my experience or in talking with producers as we get further onto the growing season, um, you know, if we're pretty sure that it's going to be a cold enough or a hard frost, cutting a couple days before, if that frost does happen, isn't going to hurt your winter survival, because chances of it regrowing and using up all the root reserves that are already there are probably slim. But if that frost doesn't come, then we can be caught. Then it could keep growing and use up the root reserves. So it's a bit of a guessing game too. But if we stick to these dates, the other thing I wanted to mention, you remind me, I spoke with a producer yesterday, and so sometimes folks will leave strips to catch snow or just to enhance winter survival. And so he had done that on a field, and he had noticed that he cut his second cut probably about this time. So, maybe not 100% respecting this critical fall period. So he maybe pushed the envelope. And what he found this year in those areas or those strips where weren't cut, the field this year looked that much better. And so I think some of it is maybe like, oh, I just do it always and I don't notice anything. Well, if you cut the whole field and you don't have a check strip per se, yeah, it looks like it may not have hurt it, right? So I thought that was very interesting that he had made some field observations about, oh, okay, maybe there is some truth and some, grassroots proof to this science. So that was reassuring to hear.
Good. And that gives us another reason why we should do a check strip every once in a while.
Yeah, right?
Eh?
Yeah,
Good. Thanks, Elizabeth.
you're welcome.
Okay, next slide is promoting our canola disease training workshops that are happening. And Sonia couldn't be here today because she is up in the Northwest region and they're doing one at the Parkland Crop Diversification Center today. And it is on already and it goes till dinner. Tomorrow there'll be one in Melita, and again starting at 9 and going till dinner. It'll be at the Wado site. And then on Friday, it will be in the Eastern region. And anybody that's interested in more interest on verticillium stripe, there'll be a few people there that'll be able to give us some more information there, and that'll be at the Kelburn farm. So a couple more days of the canola disease training workshops. So if you're interested in attending, you've got Melita tomorrow and Kelburn Farm and Glen Lee Station on Friday. So there's an opportunity there. Also, there's going to be special crop disease training, mainly on sunflowers, corn, and flax, and those will be happening in September. So in the central region, it'll be in Carmen on September the 9th, the Interlake on September the 11th, and that'll be at Arberg at the Passaic site. And then on September 16th in Beausejour in the Eastern region, and on September 18th in Wado at Melita. So, and all these start at 9 and go till dinner time. So, if you're interested in learning some more identification issues on corn or sunflowers or even the flax, a crop that we've been growing for years, but we keep learning more and more about, make sure you write those dates down and plan to attend. Okay, just a few more slides before we end the day. Here's the crop extension specialist for the province. So if you've got questions or you see something happening in your field you want to know more about, definitely give us a call and we'll do our best to give you a hand. There's our livestock and forage people, and Pam, Elizabeth, Cindy, and Kristen, their locations and their phone numbers. The Manitoba Hay Listing Service. Elizabeth mentioned that earlier today, and also a reminder to everybody regarding crop residue burning authorizations. If you need to if you're going to need to do some burning, make sure you check the website to see if it's a burning day or if you're in an area that requires a permit to burn, because it's that time of year where we need to be checking those things for before we light any fires, and definitely be careful before you light any fires. The MASC service centers in the province. Again, Elizabeth mentioned these. If you're looking at needing a hay probe or you're needing even information regarding your crop insurance, definitely get a hold of them. Heard rumor that the other two offices might be opening in the month of September, so keep that in mind if you're in those areas of Shoal Lake and Verdon. I think that's the locations where they're going to be. If you're those office may be opening probably middle of September range, so keep an eye out for that. And if you have questions or ideas for future crop talks, there's Lori's contact information, my contact information. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending and see you next week, August 27th. Holy smokes, August is just as good as gone. See ya and have a good week.